Dear listeners, a new day and a new story to discuss. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that interests me. Listen and write down what you think about this situation. I'm interested in your opinions. I can still feel the weight of that day, like a heavy cloak draped over my shoulders. It was exactly 1 year ago, a day that etched itself into my memory with the precision of a master engraver. The sun was lazily drifting across a cloudless sky, an ordinary Wednesday, but for me, it was the beginning of an unraveling. I was in my office, the clock ticking monotonously as I shuffled papers that seemed suddenly irrelevant. My mind wandered to Clara, my wife of 6 years. For better or for worse, we had vowed, yet nothing had prepared me for the worse that was lurking in the shadows. The phone rang, slicing through my thoughts. It was my buddy, Mike, inviting me for a beer after work. Can today, Mike? Got plans with Clara, I said, trying to infuse some enthusiasm into my voice. But deep down, I knew our marriage was fraying at the edges. Lunchtime rolled around, and I decided to break the monotony with a visit to the Sea Basket, famed for its fried fish sandwich. The aroma of freshly fried fish mingled with tartar sauce was usually enough to lift my spirits. But that day, as I drove back to the office, sandwich in tow, my life took a sharp, unexpected turn. At a stoplight, my heart skipped a beat. There was Clara's car, unmistakable with its dented bumper, turning into the parking lot of the infamous Midday Retreat Motel. My mind raced with confusion. It must be a mistake, I muttered to myself. But deep down, I knew. I had to know more. I followed, parking discreetly behind a row of bushy hedges. I watched, heart pounding, as Clara stepped out of her car, her movements too practiced, too assured. She glanced around briefly before heading straight for room 112. My hands were shaking, the fish sandwich forgotten, lying uneaten on the passenger seat. I wrestled with a storm of emotions. Anger, disbelief, hurt. They all clashed violently within me. Why Clara? Why here? I whispered to no one in particular. I wanted to confront her, demand answers, but I was frozen, a spectator to my own life's tragic play. Minutes felt like hours as I sat there, staring at the closed door of room 112. Questions whirled in my mind. Who is he? What did I do to deserve this? The weight of betrayal was suffocating. Then, a text from Clara popped up on my phone. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. The irony of her message, sent from a motel room, was a cruel stab to my already wounded heart. I replied with a simple, okay, love you too, masking my turmoil in a facade of normalcy. As I sat there, lost in a sea of betrayal and pain, I knew my life was about to change. But at that moment, I was just a man, heartbroken and alone, staring at the door that hid the ugly truth of my crumbling marriage. The story of that day was far from over, and the actions I would take next were unclear even to me. All I knew was that the life I thought I had was a lie, and the journey ahead was fraught with the unknown. The weight of what I'd witnessed outside the motel hung over me like a dark cloud as I drove back to the office. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, each turn and stop a mechanical motion as my mind replayed Clara's betrayal over and over. The fish sandwich, once a source of small joy, now sat untouched and forgotten. I couldn't concentrate on work. My thoughts were a chaotic whirlwind, with images of Clara entering that motel room flashing like a broken film reel. I tried to focus, but the numbers and reports on my screen blurred into insignificance. As the clock struck 5, I couldn't bear the confines of my office any longer. I needed air, space, something to dilute the bitterness that had settled in my throat. The park near our house, usually a place of solace, beckoned. Walking among the autumn leaves, I called Clara. My voice was steady, belying the turmoil within. Hey, just checking in. How's your day going? Her voice, light and unsuspecting, came through. Oh, just the usual crazy day at work. You know how it is. Yours. Same here. I lied, my heart aching with every word. Just wanted to hear your voice. We'll talk more at home, she said, a hint of warmth in her tone. The conversation, brief and superficial, ended with the usual exchange of I love yous, but they felt hollow, echoing in the vast emptiness that had grown between us. Back home, the house felt different, tainted with secrets and lies. Clara was humming in the kitchen, seemingly oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I watched her for a moment, the familiar routines we shared now painted in shades of deception. Dinner will be ready soon. How about a glass of wine? She offered, her back still turned to me. I accepted silently, taking a seat at the kitchen table. The clink of cutlery and the sizzle from the stove filled the space between us. I wanted to scream, to shatter the facade of normalcy, but words failed me. Over dinner, conversation meandered through safe, mundane topics. Clara talked about her day, but her words were like distant echoes to me. I nodded and smiled at the right moments, playing my part in the charade. As we cleared the table, my mind raced with unasked questions. Clara, did you go anywhere interesting today? The question slipped out, innocent but laced with unspoken accusations. She paused, a plate in hand. Just the usual errands during lunch. Why do you ask? No reason, just making conversation. My voice was calm, but inside, I was screaming for the truth. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of pretense. We watched TV, Clara laughing at a comedy show, while I sat beside her, lost in my own thoughts. Every laugh, every touch, felt like a betrayal. As we went to bed, the distance between us and our once shared sanctuary was palpable. Clara drifted off to sleep, her breathing steady and peaceful. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the events of the day replaying in my mind. The truth was clear, but admitting it to myself was another battle. My wife, my Clara, was living a double life, and I was the last to know. The night stretched on, a silent witness to my shattered reality. The moment of truth had come, but what I would do with it was a decision yet to be made. The morning after my grim discovery was as gray as the turmoil in my heart. I woke up to find Clara still asleep, oblivious to the storm raging within me. The sun peeked through the curtains, casting shadows that seemed to mock my predicament. I lay there, staring at her, wondering how the woman I loved could shatter our vows so carelessly. I got up quietly, my movements mechanical, my mind a battlefield of emotions. Downstairs, the silence of the house was a stark contrast to the chaos in my head. I made coffee, the bitter aroma somehow fitting for the bitterness that had seeped into my life. When Clara finally came downstairs, she was her usual self, chirpy and seemingly carefree. "Good morning, love," she greeted, leaning in for a kiss. I dodged subtly, masking my aversion with a mumbled excuse about having a sore throat. Breakfast was a silent affair. The clinking of spoons against bowls filled the air, a hollow soundtrack to our strained interaction. Clara chatted about her plans for the day, but her words were like distant echoes, drowned out by the screaming questions in my mind. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront her, to break the silence with the truth that was suffocating me. "Clara, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady but cold. She looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Is everything okay?" "No, it's not," I replied, the weight of my words heavy in the air. "I saw you yesterday, at the midday retreat motel. Who were you meeting there?" Clara's face paled, her fork clattering onto her plate. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but her eyes couldn't meet mine. "Don't lie to me, Clara. I saw you with my own eyes." "Who is he?" My voice rose, a mix of anger, hurt, and desperation. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're spying on me now? Is that what our marriage has come to? This isn't about me. It's about you and your affair." I shot back, standing up to face her. Clara's expression shifted from shock to defiance. "You have no right to accuse me of anything. You're just being paranoid." "Paranoid? I saw you, Clara. I saw you enter that room." My voice echoed in the kitchen, a stark reminder of the distance that had grown between us. She turned away, her body language a mix of guilt and anger. "I don't have to explain myself to you. You clearly don't trust me." "Trust? How can I trust you when you're sneaking around in motels?" I countered, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and sorrow. Clara didn't respond. She just stood there, her back to me, a silent admission of her betrayal. The air between us was charged with unspoken words and broken trust. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I realized that no explanation could mend what had been broken. The woman I loved, the woman I had built a life with, was a stranger to me now. The confrontation ended not with a resolution, but with a heavy silence that hung in the air like a thick fog. Clara left the house without another word, leaving me alone with my shattered illusions. As I sat there, the reality of my situation sinking in, I knew that our marriage, our life together, was irrevocably altered. The cold confrontation had laid bare the truth, but it was a truth I was still grappling to accept. The day after the confrontation with Clara was a blur of dark thoughts and scheming. I was a man consumed, not just by the betrayal, but by a burning need for retribution. The office became my war room, my sanctuary of plotting, where I mapped out my plan with meticulous detail. I couldn't focus on work. My mind was laser-focused on one thing: vengeance. As I sat there, staring blankly at my computer screen, an idea began to take shape, a sinister plot that felt like poison in my veins, yet I couldn't resist its call. My first step was simple yet crucial: gather evidence. I needed concrete proof of Clara's infidelity. I couldn't let emotions cloud my judgment. This had to be methodical, clinical. So, I hired a private investigator, a guy named Rick, with a reputation for being discreet yet effective. I met Rick in a dingy coffee shop on the outskirts of town. The place was nearly empty, perfect for a clandestine meeting. I need evidence of my wife's activities, I told him, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. Rick, a man with a face as hard as his life, nodded. I've seen this many times, pal. You want photos, videos, whatever it takes. Exactly, I replied, my fist clenching involuntarily. I want to catch her in the act. The next part of my plan was more complicated, more twisted. I knew Clara frequented a local gym. It was there that I suspected she met her lover. My plan was to turn her sanctuary into her trap. I joined the same gym, a place I had never set foot in before. I kept a low profile, watching, waiting for the moment to strike. It wasn't long before I saw her there, laughing and chatting with a muscular guy, their intimacy unmistakable. My heart pounded with a mix of anger and vindication. That's when I made my move. I approached them casually, feigning surprise. Clara, what a coincidence seeing you here, I said, my voice dripping with feigned innocence. Clara's face turned pale, her eyes widening in shock. What? What are you doing here? She stammered, her composure slipping. Just joined, I replied, smiling at her companion. And who's this? Clara introduced him as Mark, her personal trainer. The lies rolled off her tongue with practiced ease. I shook Mark's hand, the grip firm, a silent battle of wills. The conversation was brief, but it achieved what I intended, sowing seeds of doubt and fear. Clara knew I was onto her, and I could see the panic in her eyes as I walked away. But my plot didn't end there. I knew Clara's routine, her habits, her secrets. I started showing up at places I knew she'd be: the grocery store, the coffee shop she frequented, always playing the role of the unsuspecting husband. My presence, constant yet unobtrusive, was a reminder that I was watching, always watching. The psychological warfare was taking its toll on Clara. She became jittery, paranoid, her lies more frequent and desperate. But I wasn't done yet. I needed that final piece of evidence, the undeniable proof that would seal her fate. Rick, the PI, came through. He handed me an envelope, his expression grim. You sure you want to see this? He asked. I nodded, my hands trembling as I opened the envelope. Inside were photos, clear and damning, of Clara and Mark in a compromising embrace, their affair no longer a shadow but a stark, painful reality. Armed with evidence and fueled by a thirst for vengeance, I began to plan my next move. Clara's betrayal had lit a fire within me, a fire that demanded retribution. I was no longer the man she married. I was an avenger, cold and calculating, ready to strike. The plot of vengeance was in motion, and there was no turning back. In the wake of uncovering Clara's betrayal, the world around me seemed to shift on its axis. The aftermath was a cacophony of emotions, legal battles, and a deep sense of betrayal that permeated every aspect of my life. The day I decided to confront Clara with the evidence was etched in my memory with unerring detail. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind, over and over, but nothing could prepare me for the actual confrontation. It was a cold, dreary evening when she came home from work. The house, once a symbol of our love and life together, now felt like a hollow shell. As she entered, I could sense her unease, the air thick with unspoken tension. Clara, we need to talk, I said, my voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of anger. She looked at me, a flicker of fear in her eyes. What's wrong? She asked, trying to mask her nervousness. I threw the envelope with the photos on the table. I know about you and Mark. Don't even try to deny it. Clara's face crumpled as she picked up the photos, her facade crumbling. I can explain, she stammered, tears brimming in her eyes. Explain? How can you possibly explain this? I demanded, my voice rising in anger. It was a mistake. I never meant to hurt you, she sobbed, clutching the photos. A mistake? You call this a mistake? I shouted, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and pain. Clara tried to approach me, reaching out her hand, but I recoiled. Don't touch me, I spat out, the words like venom. I'm sorry, I truly am. Can we try to work this out? She pleaded, her voice breaking. Work this out? You think we can just work this out? I laughed bitterly. This is unforgivable. The conversation spiraled into a heated argument, accusations and hurtful words thrown like daggers. Our marriage, once filled with love and promises, had disintegrated into a battlefield of betrayal and heartache. I told her I wanted a divorce, my voice cold and resolute. Clara broke down, begging for forgiveness, for a chance to make things right. But the trust was shattered, the love tainted beyond repair. The following weeks were a blur of lawyers, divorce papers, and a deep sense of loss. The divorce proceedings were a stark reminder of how far we had fallen. Clara tried to argue for reconciliation, but I was adamant. The betrayal was too deep, the wounds too raw. I watched as the life we had built together was dissected and divided, a once happy union reduced to legal terms and conditions. Friends and family chose sides, the whispers and pitying looks a constant reminder of our public downfall. Through it all, I struggled with a maelstrom of emotions. Anger, betrayal, sadness, and a profound sense of loss engulfed me. I mourned not just the end of our marriage, but the death of the love and trust one had once held so dear. The house, now devoid of Clara's presence, felt empty and cold. I wandered through the rooms, haunted by memories of happier times, each corner a reminder of what had been and what was lost. As the final papers were signed, sealing the end of our marriage, I felt a hollow sense of victory. Yes, I had won, but at what cost? The aftermath of revelations had left deep scars, a painful reminder of the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences of betrayal. The chapter of Clara and me had closed, but the story of my life was still being written. The road ahead was uncertain, a path I would have to navigate alone, carrying the weight of a broken heart and a shattered trust. In the wake of the divorce, my life felt like a ship adrift in a vast, turbulent ocean. The finality of the signed papers had left me hollow, an empty shell of the man I once was. The path forward was uncharted, fraught with uncertainty and shadowed by the remnants of betrayal. My days melded into each other, a monotonous blur of waking up, going to work, and coming back to an empty house. The silence was deafening, a stark reminder of the void Clara's absence had left. I tried to fill the emptiness with work, throwing myself into my job with a fervor that bordered on obsession. But the nights were the hardest, the darkness a canvas for my thoughts, replaying the events that had shattered my world. One evening, as I sat in my living room, the walls seemed to close in on me. I needed an escape, a break from the prison of my thoughts. On a whim, I decided to visit a local bar, a place I hadn't stepped foot in for years. The familiar hum of conversation and clinking of glasses was strangely comforting. As I sipped my drink, lost in thought, a voice interrupted my reverie. "Mind if I join you?" a woman asked, gesturing to the empty seat beside me. I looked up, surprised. She was around my age, with a kind smile that reached her eyes. "Sure, go ahead," I replied, moving my drink aside. We struck up a conversation, easy and unforced. Her name was Sarah, and like me, she was navigating the aftermath of a failed marriage. We talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing as smoothly as the drinks. It was refreshing to talk to someone who understood, who had walked a similar path of heartache and recovery. Sarah had a warmth about her, an understanding that soothed the raw edges of my soul. Divorce can feel like the end of the world, but sometimes it's just the beginning of a new chapter, she said, her voice tinged with a hard-earned wisdom. Her words resonated with me, a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had enveloped my life. We continued talking, the hours slipping by unnoticed. It was the first time in months that I had felt a genuine connection, a sense of companionship that I had sorely missed. As the night drew to a close, Sarah and I exchanged numbers, a silent agreement that this was a conversation we both wanted to continue. Walking back home, I felt a lightness in my step, a sense that maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward after all. The days that followed were a mix of reflection and newfound hope. I started to venture out more, exploring hobbies and interests I had long neglected. Sarah and I met often, our friendship deepening with each encounter. We were two souls, broken yet healing, finding solace in each other's company. Our conversations were a balm to my wounded heart, a reminder that life could still hold moments of joy and connection. We shared our dreams, our fears, and our journey towards healing. With Sarah, I could be myself, raw and unguarded, a luxury I hadn't realized I had missed so much. One evening, as we sat by the river, watching the sunset in a blaze of orange and pink, Sarah turned to me. "You know, sometimes the most challenging paths lead to the most beautiful destinations," she said, her hand finding mine. I looked at her, the setting sun casting a warm glow on her face. In that moment, I felt a shift within me, a sense that maybe the path forward wasn't so daunting after all. With Sarah by my side, I felt a sense of companionship, a shared understanding that made the journey less lonely. The path forward was still uncertain, strewn with the remnants of my past and the challenges of rebuilding. But as I sat there, hand in hand with Sarah, I realized that perhaps the path wasn't meant to be walked alone. Maybe, just maybe, it was a journey meant to be shared, a journey towards new beginnings and newfound hope.